Alrighty, g'day everybody. So we've been dealing with a pandemic these last few months, but there's another pandemic that I wanted to talk about, and it's a pandemic that I'm a lot more familiar with in terms of my understanding of the problem, and I think you know what pandemic I'm talking about. I'm talking about the pandemic of lonely guys that aren't getting any, they don't have a girlfriend, they can't get any one-nighters, no friends with benefits, nothing, they're involuntarily celibate. For the purpose of this video, I want to talk about young guys in their 20s and 30s because they are the ones that, they're at the age where they would expect a girlfriend or they would expect the opportunity to find one. But because of either their physical attractiveness or their mental health problems, that's what's holding them back. And it's like they feel and they crave and they covet what most people can get, but they can't because of their looks or their psychological shortcomings. Maybe they're on the Spurg spectrum, so to speak. They have a very kind of Aspie personality. But either way, it ultimately boils down to the fact that they are involuntarily celibate, that they have tried to get a girlfriend, or they've at least tried to basically get some friends with benefits, spin plates, get a rotation, but nothing works. They go on Tinder and they swipe and swipe and swipe, and in the end it's like you've run out of matches, or you've run out of people in your area to match with, and you haven't got any matches. So it's like, what do these guys do? And in today's video, I want to talk about what we as a society can do to address this problem. And by addressing the problem, I don't mean like copy Saudi Arabia or something and do something that only benefits men, which, would then in turn subjugate half of the population. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean a system that positively affects everybody, that allows everybody, of both genders to live their lives in peace and to be with whomever they want, but dramatically reduces the number of lonely, celibate guys. And keep in mind, you're never going to eliminate guys that can't get a girlfriend. There's always going to be that mentally ill person who lives on the fringes of society or whatnot. There's always going to be that person who just is too far beyond the pale. Let's keep it real. Actually, it's a little bit like car accidents. We could eliminate car accidents if we were to eliminate vehicles from the roads altogether, but it would impede our freedoms so much that we don't ever go down that option. We say, look, let's keep living in a world where we can drive automobiles, but let's keep the road toll at a minimum. And that's what I'm talking about. Now, the next disclaimer I wanted to make is that none of these things will happen that I'm about to say, these hypotheticals as to how we can fix this problem. None of them are ever going to happen. This video is purely a thought experiment, All I want to do is create a little bit of a dialogue between me and the people, whoever decides to watch this video, as to what we could do, I want to hear your opinion. Leave me a comment and give your opinion. What could we do? But before you leave a comment, maybe listen to my video so you know what angle I'm coming at this from. Right, and there's one more disclaimer I have for you. Bear with me, I have one more disclaimer for you. There will be guys that'll watch this who are involuntarily celibate, maybe, 5, 10, 30% of the people who watch this have never had more than one girlfriend in their lives or something, or, they believe themselves to be affected by this problem. And these guys will say to me, well, hang on a second, CBP, you're just a normie, you've supposedly, if we believe what you say, you've been with like close to your body count is massive, you've had lots and lots of girlfriends. What would you know about this issue? Why are you qualified to speak about this, CBP? And of course, the answer is that I'm not qualified, but I don't think that your lay count should have anything to do with it. I don't think that you need to have cancer to be a medical professional that treats people with cancer, nor is any of these proposals that I'm going to give to you, nor are any of them ever going to be implemented. So I don't want to hear that argument. But what I will say is, because I am essentially a normie who's never been affected by the whole TFL phenomena, I feel that gives me an unbiased, unemotional look at it. Because let's keep it real. There are a lot of guys that are directly affected by this. They've been rejected their whole lives. And they do develop this bias, this resentment, this anger. It does build up. And I actually think that if anything, the guys that are most affected by this problem are the most likely to just basically blame milady for this whole phenomenon. They never really look at it from a societal perspective, or if they do, it's often through a very kind of fascistic lens. So, I do think that my unaffected status actually, if anything, gives me more perspective on the issue. All I'm doing with today's video is giving a hypothetical, what could we as a society do to bring the number of involuntarily celibate men from 30% of the male population down to, say, 5%. Now, I'm not going to go full normie and say, well, these guys just need to fix their personality, bro. They need to get a shower and a haircut. However, what I will say is that there is a personality component to begin with, meaning there are a lot of guys that get kind of caught up in that community, that culture, and they don't really belong there. They are either in high school and they haven't kind of figured themselves out yet, or they really haven't put themselves out there to the full degree that they should have because of some sort of social anxiety, behavioral problem or whatever, but they do actually have the potential to ascend. So what can those guys do? And, well, I talked about this the other day. I made a video where I talked about the comparison mindset. There's a lot of guys out there. They have every opportunity in the world to make something of themselves, but they never amount to anything because they have this comparison mindset. Why bother going on Tinder when Chad is on Tinder? I'm going to be competing doubly as hard to get what Chad can get without even trying. So what's the point, Like, in my opinion, that's the equivalent of me saying, I'm not going to focus on being financially independent and building a happy life for myself because, look at Donald Trump Jr. He inherited millions of dollars without even trying. So what's the point in focusing on financial independence if the economic race for financial freedom is unfair? Like, I'm competing against rich people, so why even bother? I'm just going to go crawl into a gutter or something. That's the type of mentality you need to avoid. Now, on a more kind of societal structure, the second idea I have, I admit, it might be a total cope, okay? This may be a total cope, but I was listening to somebody with a sociological degree who actually talked about a variation of this proposal. And I've heard multiple people who actually have political philosophy degrees speak about this. So, it's not as far-fetched as what it sounds. And that proposal is, what if we were to develop a male body positivity movement for all guys and try and walk away from this whole idea of only celebrating the Chad alpha male? What if the mainstream media was to push a male body positivity movement aggressively? What if we were to do the male equivalent, all men have curves? It sounds ridiculous, and you might think, well, what would that do? Is that going to change who Stacey finds attractive on Tinder? And the answer is actually yes, potentially. You see, we think that we are attracted to what we are attracted to. For example, guys are attracted to a lean body fat percentage, a tall, skinny, well, not skinny, but a tall, lean, healthy, petite girl because she has a low body fat percentage. And, we know that obesity is unhealthy, and therefore a low body fat percentage is what we find attractive because it symbolizes good health. Well, guess what? Back in the Renaissance period, it was the exact opposite. Us guys, we were genuinely attracted to a chubby girl, we got wooded up over it. We actually found the overweight girl much more attractive. The idea of this type of physique would have been really unattractive back in the 15th, 16th century. You know what I mean? We think that we are attracted to what we are attracted to, but that's just not the case. It does evolve over time. And I know that people are going to say, come on, CBP, that's just such a giant cope, bro. On a guy, being tall is just inherent. Every girl from every culture finds that attractive. A strong jawline is universal. High cheekbones, a good brow ridge, these things are universal. They go across all cultures. They are time immemorial. That's what people will say to me. And the answer is I actually kind of agree to a certain point, but, I'll give you a media example of what I'm talking about, okay? I'll give you a modern, contemporary example. There are a group of guys over at BuzzFeed called the Try Guys. They're very famous. A lot of you will know who the Try Guys are. Now, these guys, for all intensive purposes, are average-looking dudes. They range from about a 4.5 to a 7. And these guys are renowned by their audience members, their teeny bopper audience, as being so cute. Every girl in the BuzzFeed comment section thinks Zach is just so attractive. They would do anything to have Zach as their boyfriends. And the reason is not because of what some guys in the Lookism forums will say, like, oh, they just want to take advantage of him, or they see him as like a beta provider boyfriend and whatever. No, these teenagers and these, early 20-something-year-olds in the comment section, they are genuinely physically attracted to these guys. And it's because, in a sense, they've been marketed, is kind of the word that I'm going to use here. You see, what happens is that when you take a group of guys that are just, average looking, now, this would not work on like a Danny DeVito type, level of looks. But, you take a bunch of guys that are clearly just normie tier, and you showcase them on a personality level. You introduce their personality level to millions of teenage girls, basically. And what happens is that it humanizes them. It makes it has an effect that I am struggling to put into words, but I know that it's real. And I see it all the time. And look, the reality is that if we were to do this on like a mass level, if we were to do like a media campaign to do this with all guys, in the sort of like anywhere from like a 2 or a 3 out of 10, all the way up to a 7, real men have curves, all men are beautiful, real men are under 5'7". If we were to do some sort of giant media campaign, would this solve the problem? Of course not. But would it hurt? I don't think it would hurt at all. Like, I'm seeing this massive rise in the number of guys who say that they like a thick girl, they're into the whole thick look. But this is all just like media push, this is all just like magazines, and like it was pushed in sort of like the last decade, the 2010s. This whole idea that thick is attractive. All of these guys are talking about how they like a thick body on a girl. And I'm like, 30 years ago, this type of physique was not celebrated, and you wouldn't have these guys celebrating it and saying that they're into it. Like, I'm not going to go into detail about it, but there's website analytics that prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that your location, your culture, all of these things do determine what you're into, basically. So therefore, I do think that while it does, on the surface of it all, sound like a cope, I do think that my male body positivity movement, which would never happen in the mainstream, but, mainstream media would never go for something like this. But, in theory, I think it's got some validity to it. And since we're getting carried away on hypotheticals, let me give you my third hypothetical way we could combat the rise of involuntary celibacy. All right, so I understand that being with an escort is not a fully viable way to make up for the lost validation that comes from never having a girlfriend or whatever. But I do know that the Netherlands gives its disabled citizens a grant every year that they're able to spend on escorts, basically, to fulfill that need. And I could be mistaken, but I understand that the UK has a few loopholes in its system that allows its disabled citizens to do similar things. What if the government every single year was to give a grant to its people that are affected by involuntary celibacy and basically give them a grant that allows them to use escorts, say, every month or every couple of weeks or whatever? Like, I did a quick running of the US numbers and I figured out that all you'd have to do is reduce the amount of oil subsidies that are going out to the oil companies and maybe cut a little bit of military spending, and you could easily pay for it. And again, if you were to combine this idea with the other ideas that I came up with earlier, a media campaign to make average guys perceived as more attractive. We could also have a campaign to teach teenage boys how to sweet talk a girl, take the guys that struggle and make it part of the curriculum to learn how to talk to a girl. And I do not want to return to a society like the 1950s where it is the expectation that you get married, that you are essentially shamed, especially if you're a girl and you choose not to get married. But I also agree with Jordan Peterson's perspective that we should also teach the other side as well. You know, there is a little bit of truth to that whole notion that a corporate career does not usually provide a substitute to a family. You know, I think all of these things combined would maybe make it a little bit more diverse. You know, I think it would maybe put a little bit of a dent in the very one-sided dating economy that we currently have.